Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's another beautiful afternoon at Google, and we'd like to welcome you to the latest in our Authors at Google series. It's our great honor today to be speaking with Brian Copeland, who is the author of several books, and he will talk to you about them today. Brian is a media personality and comedian. His work has been featured everywhere from the San Francisco theater scene, where it was the longest running play, to more recently the potential for his book to develop into a television show. And also his book, Not a Genuine Black Man, will also be premiering in San Jose. So if you want to catch the theater down there, it will be at the Hoover Theater as well. And we're also pleased to announce that this very same book is selected as the 2009 choice for the Silicon Valley Reads Association. So you'll be getting an advance notice today. You can get a head start on the book, and then when the discussions come next February, you'll be all set to go. And the other most interesting fact that we have is that Brian also had a feature in the recent movie The Bucket List. So he spans all sorts of media personalities and types. So we'll have him speak for a while, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers. We'll circulate a Q&A mic, so just for the benefit of our YouTube and virtual audiences, please feel free to use that mic. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Brian. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. Oh, it is a pleasure to be here, especially knowing that everywhere I walk, there's like food. How is everybody so thin here? There's the food every 150 feet. I would weigh like 1,000 pounds if I worked at this place. It is a pleasure to be here. As Cliff mentioned, and a lot of you I see have the book in your hand, my book is called Not a Genuine Black Man. It is based on my one-man solo show of the same name. And it's been a pretty incredible ride for about the 4 years since the play premiered and then became a book. I thought I'd tell you how this kind of came to be and tell you the story. Back about 7 years ago, I found myself in a position where I had gone through a divorce and had custody of 3 kids by myself. At the time, they were 7th grade, 1st grade, and 5th grade. I like to say my ex-wife and I had a custody fight. She won. I got custody. And prior to that, I had been like traveling as like the opening act for like Aretha Franklin and Natalie Cole and Ray Charles, and most recently before that, I was Smokey Robinson's opening act. But suddenly, my life became about, emergency forms and school lunches and carpools, and I was like ready to climb up on a tower with a rifle if I didn't do something. I knew I'd do something, but I didn't know what to do. Then 9/11 hit. And when 9/11 hit, there were a lot of stories, that broke a lot actually broke all of our hearts. But the one that really hit me the most was the story of Cantor Fitzgerald, the brokerage firm. And I don't know which tower they were located in, but I saw the president of the company on CNN. And he was talking about how he was always the first one at his desk. And on this particular morning, September 11th, it was his son's first day at school, so he decided to take his son to kindergarten and come in late. So he wasn't at his desk when the plane hit the tower, but everybody else was. And he literally lost like 99% of his company. Like 98 or 99% of his employees were killed. So they show this montage of all of these pictures of all of his employees, and there are people of all shapes and sizes and ages and colors. And I just started to cry. Because I thought all these people that morning just got up, they kissed their husbands, their wives, their girlfriends, their boyfriends, their kids, and they said, "We'll see you tonight." And this Saturday, we've got plans, to go to a concert. And next summer, we're going to go to Europe. And, we're going to go camping. And, someday we'll do this and someday we'll do that. And then they went and they sat down at their desk in a cubicle, and all of a sudden they're gone. So I started to think about my somedays, because we all have things that we say that someday we're going to do. And being a stand-up, I started stand-up comedy when I was 18 years old. I started the week after I graduated high school. That's how long I'd been doing it. And the natural evolution is a one-man stage show that's a mix of comedy and drama. And I'd always said, someday I'm going to do it. So I realized this is it. It is someday, because to be crass, you never know when your plane is going to hit your tower. So I made a list of all the things that I said that I was going to do someday. And at the top of the list was a one-man stage show. Okay, only problem was I had no idea what to write about. So I do a program for KGO Radio on Sunday mornings at 9. I've been doing it for about 10 years. And I was lucky enough to have on one of my comedy idols, Carl Reiner, the writer, director, producer. And I told Carl I wanted to write a show. I was at a career crossroads. I wanted to write a show, but I had no idea what to write about. And he says, it's funny, this happens to every performer at one point. He goes, and when I was in your position, he says, it was 1959, suddenly I'm out of work and I'm trying to figure out what to do. And he says, I got the advice to find the piece of ground that you alone stand on, that nobody else in the world does, and write from there. So he says, I thought, what's my piece of ground? Well, I'm a married comedy writer. I live in New Rochelle with my wife and kids, and I write for a variety show in New York. And that became the Dick Van Dyke Show. So what he said to me is, you've got to find your own piece of ground and write from your piece of ground. I thought, well, what's different and unique about me? Then about 2 or 3 days later, I get a letter at KGO. And in talk radio, all the mail that you get, snail mail that actually comes through the physical post office only comes from two sources: old ladies and whack jobs. That's it. Nobody else writes you. Old ladies and nuts. I've got a guy in San Bernardino who's been writing me for years, and he writes what I call ransom notes because the letters are all cut out of magazines and pasted together. I hate you, you suck, die. And it's like all pasted together, and I'm thinking, my God, this guy has no life. So first thing I noticed with this one letter is that it's typed. So like on an actual typewriter. So that blew my mind. I thought, where do you find ribbon for a typewriter in the 21st century? What do you go to Office Depot? Do you have any typewriter ribbon? Yes, over by the buggy whips. No, over from the whale oil lamps. So I open this letter, and it's unsigned, as whack job letters always are. And it says, as an African American, I am disgusted every time I hear your voice because you are not a genuine black man. And I thought, bingo, that's it. That's my piece of ground. For some reason, I have heard this crap, and I'll use the word crap because that's what it is, for most of my adolescence and adult life. And I started to think, I took kind of an inventory. I thought, why do people say that to me? Is it how I dress? Is it how I talk? Is it, because my TV is set to TiVo Frasier? Why, I started to think, okay, what's black? Okay, I don't talk ghetto. When I hear the word axe, I think of it as a noun. It's not a verb. I'm going to go ask my mother. What are you, Lizzie Borden? Get out of here. I don't believe blacks should be paid reparations for slavery. But if they send me the check, I'll cash it. I'm confused. I'm not crazy. So I go through this whole long list, this whole litany of things. And I realized that culturally, it's because of where and how I grew up. And I grew up as one of the few African Americans in San Leandro, California, which is on the border of Oakland. And we moved there in 1972 at a time when San Leandro was 99.99% white. And Oakland on the border was half black. And San Leandro was a town that was built on white flight. And so I spent my youth from the age of 8 when we moved there. It was my mother, my grandmother, and my 4 little sisters moved there from Hayward to get away from my father. My father was very abusive, and he was in and out of our lives. He would do things like say he was going to the store. One time he said he was going to the store for a pack of cigarettes, and he showed up 3 years later. Literally, that's the kind of stuff he would do. So I'm 8 years old, and he tried to strangle me. And my mom said, that's it, and we got to get away from him. So somehow she gets us into San Leandro. So once I knew what my piece of ground was and that was it, I would walk my kids to school in the morning, and I would sit down at this little cafe by my house, and I would write down in marble composition notebooks every story I could think of about growing up in San Leandro, about being the only one, being the one that was different. All of the stories, the things that were funny, the things that were painful. I noticed that there were a lot of things I'd forgotten. Some I'd forgotten, legitimately. Others I realized I had deliberately forgotten because they were so incredibly painful, that I couldn't deal with them otherwise. So I go through this process for about 8 or 9 months, and I have, by the time I'm down, I've got about a dozen of these notebooks, front and back pages all filled with stories. And I decide, well, why don't I go to the library and just kind of look and see what was going on in town at the time, just to kind of put it in some kind of context. So I go to the library and I tell the librarian that I want to write a show about growing up black in San Leandro at a time when it was all white. And she goes, I've got something you should see. And she pulls out for me this yellowing stack of typewritten paper. Again, typewriters figure prominently in this story. And it was a term paper written by a San Leandro resident by the name of Don Magnifico for a sociology class at Cal State East Bay, which was then Cal State Hayward, called How San Leandro's 10 Homeowners Associations Keep the City an All-White Ghetto. And I went, what? And I looked through this paper and I find out that San Leandro had a national reputation as one of the most racist suburbs in the country. That they had 10 homeowners associations that controlled the city, and they kept black people out. Newsweek magazine had come and done a thing. There was a national documentary, a documentary that was aired nationally over CBS in 1971 called The Suburban Wall, about how there was at the Oakland San Leandro border. At Durant Street, they used to call it the invisible wall, because if you were black, you knew not to step over the line and cross over into San Leandro or you'd be in trouble. There'd be a cop that would actually sit there and would follow you. If even little kids on bicycles would follow you until either you were so intimidated you turned around and went back across the border to Oakland, or they found some pretext to stop you and intimidated you, so you turned around and you went back across the border. I found out that the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights had come to town and had actually held hearings because they wanted to know why it is that you have Oakland that is so culturally diverse, and here you have this little white enclave. So I located Don Magnifico, still lived in town. I said, I read your paper. He goes, God, that was 35 years ago. I forgot about it. I go, well, can I use it? And he goes, knock yourself out. And I used it, and that was ground zero for my research. I was able to track down a lot of people he talked to. I found the transcripts from the hearings. I found the documentary, which is on my website. If you want to see the Suburban Wall, it's on my website, briancopeland.com. And then I figured I had enough stuff together, and I decided that the next step was I needed to find a director. So I went to the Marsh in San Francisco, which is a great breeding ground for new theater, and I found this great director named David Ford. And I said, I have an idea for a show. And he says, what's it about? And I said, it's about housing discrimination and suicidal depression. And he said, wow, that's unusual. I think we might be able to do something with that. I don't think that's been done. Because what I realized was that as a result of all the things that I had gone through and all the things that I had held in, that as an adult, I suffered from post-traumatic stress syndrome from all of the terrible things that had happened to me being the only black kid in the neighborhood. From, adults driving the cars, and yelling nigger out the car window, go back to Oakland, from being in stores as a little boy and having people follow me from aisle to aisle and making me empty my pockets, from, all of these kinds of things. That at one point when I was in my mid-30s, I ended up in my garage with my convertible top down and the motor running. And had a neighbor not heard music playing and called the police, I wouldn't be here today. So we put this show together. It was supposed to run for 6 weeks, and something kind of amazing happened. The first night there were 7 people. Next night there were 14 people. Next night there were 30 people. Inside of 3 weeks, you couldn't get in there. And the show ran for 2.5 years and became the longest running one-man show in the history of San Francisco theater. Then I was asked to write a book, and you hold the book in your hands. And I'm amazed at the way the book has been received. Colleges and universities are requiring it. High schools are requiring it. Because it is a fascinating story that this was going on at this time all across America. In every major city in America, once it was illegal to discriminate, you had a white flight where you had the suburbs and little communities springing up around, Chicago or Philadelphia or Oakland or San Francisco. And what they did was they created these homeowners associations that were basically pseudo corporations where they could arbitrarily decide who was and who wasn't a fit resident to live in that community. So I don't know how much my mother has passed on, and so has my grandmother, so I don't know how much she knew about San Leandro at the time that we got there. But she moved us into this apartment complex, 100-unit apartment complex, and to this day, I don't know how she got us in. I do know that the manager, well, first of all, the guy who owned the place was a real bigot. And he was a big, wealthy landowner, owned a lot of rental property in the Oakland, San Leandro, Hayward area. And 2 weeks after we got there, the manager who rented to us was gone. So my theory is that what happened was that this guy rented to us as kind of a screw you to the owner. It was kind of like, here's my 2 weeks notice. By the way, rented to blacks. See you later. Bye. So we have no idea. So I'm 8 years old, and my mother tells me, we've been there about a week and we're unpacking. The first week you move into a new place, you're unpacking and everything. And she says, why don't you grab your baseball bat and ball, and there's a park nearby, and why don't you go to the park and introduce yourself to some of the neighborhood kids. So I'm walking down the street, I'm 8 years old, I got my bat and my ball, and all of a sudden this convertible pulls up and it's got 6 teenagers in it, 3 boys, 3 girls. And the boys all have on Letterman jackets that say Rebels. Immediately, I don't think this is a good sign. And kind of find out they were from neighboring San Lorenzo High School, which is about a mile away, and that borders San Leandro. And San Lorenzo High School's theme was the Confederacy. That was their theme. They were the rebels, and their theme was the Confederacy. The parking lot for the faculty was Mason-Dixon Lane. Instead of a homecoming king and homecoming queen, they had Colonel Reb and Miss Southern Belle, where if you were the homecoming king, you had to dress in a big Confederate uniform, and if you were the homecoming queen, you dressed as Scarlett O'Hara, kind of a thing. And they, the Confederate flag was on their helmets and all of this stuff. And, if this were, Alabama or Georgia or Mississippi or somewhere, I'm telling this story, you'd go, so, but this is Northern California. This is, this is right after the summer of love. This is, 20 miles from San Francisco. This is 10 miles from UC Berkeley, and here you've got this crap going on. So I asked the kid in the car, what the kid is driving, can you tell me how to get to the park? And he says, what for? They don't allow no niggers in that park. And my mother was very, very proper with us about grammar, and I said to him, they don't allow no is a double negative. Which cancels itself out, so that means that they do allow niggers in that park. Well, he didn't think it was as funny as you guys do, and he said, let's kick his ass. And so they chased me in the car. And so I'm running like crazy. I'm running across lawns, and I cut across lawns, and I make a quick right turn, and I see a police car, and I think, oh, thank God, I'm saved. So as I approach, this tall blonde cop gets out. He's wearing these mirrored sunglasses, that were so cop chic in the 70s. You talk to these guys, it's like talking to the side of a toaster is what you feel like. And I run towards him, and I think that I'm saved, and he's going to ask me, where did they go, what direction they go in, and basically he asked me, what is it that I'm doing there, and where do I live? And I tell him where it is that I live. I'm somewhere, I'm in the neighborhood here, and he says, hey, you better show me. He doesn't believe that I live there. So he says, but first, take your bat and ball and put them on the hood of the squad car. So I do that. And then he makes me raise my arms, and he pats me down. I'm an 8-year-old boy. Then he throws me in the back seat of the police car, and I direct him to the apartment complex. He takes me to the front door, tells my mother that I have been using the bat as a weapon, which is a felony, and that she had better keep a closer eye on me. So that was my first experience. I'm 8 years old. And this is August of 1972. So after that, I'm freaked. And I don't go outside by myself very often after that. I'd like to read a passage from the book just to give you an idea of how even things that were very, very innocuous, things that are not that big of a deal, were a major deal when you're the only black kid in town, or one of the only black kids in town. When you want to get a haircut, for example, you just go to the barber, right, and you get a haircut. Well, this was a major, major ordeal. This is a chapter called Just a Trim, about the first time I tried to get a haircut in San Leandro at the age of 8. I didn't venture far from home after the police episode. It wasn't safe. I spent most of the rest of August in the apartment, either reading my comics alone in my room, playing games with my sisters, or watching television. My self-imposed exile came to an end one Saturday when Grandma announced that since school was starting soon, I'd need to get a haircut. Every new school year started the same way, with a haircut and a new pair of shoes. It was tradition. Grandma believed that these two things were the keys to success. As long as your head and your feet look all right, you're okay, she'd say. I had a regular barber in Oakland. Mr. Johnson at Johnson's Barbershop had been cutting my hair since I was a first grader. His son Joseph and I had been in class together, so when it came time for me to get a trim, we patronized his place. I grabbed a couple of comic books to read while I waited for my turn in the chair and announced, "Okay, I'm ready to go see Mr. Johnson." "I don't want you to go to Mr. Johnson's anymore," Mom said. "Why?" "We live in a new community and we need to support the merchants here." Sue, she called my grandmother Sue. Everybody called my grandmother sister. When my mom was little, she couldn't say sister, and it came out as Sue, so that was my grandma's nickname. "Sue, find some place to get his hair cut in San Leandro." "Shit," Grandma said as she opened the front door and headed to the car with me in tow. I should warn you, that was Grandma's favorite noun, verb, adjective, everything. Grandma started the engine, backed our new Chevrolet Malibu out of its parking stall, and headed toward the street. She stopped at the driveway entrance and began to turn right. Suddenly, she slammed on the brakes. A late model sedan sped up the street in front of us. As it passed, the pretty young white woman behind the wheel rolled down her window and screamed, "Go back to Oakland." "You go to shit," Grandma yelled back. I wanted to go back inside. I started to think that this was a bad idea. "Where are we going, Grandma?" "I don't know." "Do you know where the barbershops are around here?" "Boy," I said, "I don't know," she snapped. I knew to shut up when she got like this. I was quiet as she headed toward the downtown area. Soon we saw a shopping center. Grandma parked and we got out. She grabbed me by the wrist with a vice-like grip. Grandma never held my hand. She held my wrist. She said, "That way you can't run no place." We walked around the center until we saw the red and white swirl of a barber pole. We walked into an environment so sterile it looked like a NASA decontamination chamber. Everything looked spit-shined. The chrome was sparkling and the mirrors and glass didn't have the smudge or fingerprint on them. Even though the barber chairs were full and barbers were furiously working away, there wasn't any hair on the floor. I'd never seen anything like it. There was a boisterous chatter as Grandma and I walked in. There was laughing and talking and storytelling amid the buzz of the electric clipper and the snip, snip, snipping of scissors. It was a symphony orchestra of various voices and sounds. A symphony that stopped the second we set foot inside the door. It was like those old commercials where E.F. Hutton just spoke and everybody wanted to hear what he was going to say next. The entire sea of white faces seemed to be waiting for some words of wisdom from us. A gray-haired barber in a blue smock abruptly stopped cutting the hair of the little boy perched in a red removable riser on the barber chair. He shut off the clippers and held them suspended in midair as he looked us over. Then he smiled. "May I help you?" he said, the word help taking on a friendliness in the tone he used. Grandma didn't smile. She looked back at him, hard, stern. He needed to get his hair cut, she said in her no-nonsense way. "I'm sorry," the barber said, still smiling. "We don't cut his kind of hair." He pointed to a sign on the wall that read, "No naturals, no relaxers." Why didn't the signs just read, "No blacks or Art Garfunkel allowed"? "We don't know how to cut that type of hair," he said, still smiling. I could feel the stares of the other patrons boring into me. Each set of eyes a pair of hot miniature drills cutting me, searing me. "Can't help you," he continued. "Sorry." Grandma's grip on my wrist tightened as she turned on her heels and headed back out the door. "You might try one of the shops in Oakland," I heard him call out as the din of the symphony resumed. Grandma was quiet as she stomped back to the Malibu. "Shit," I heard her mutter under her breath. We spent the next hour driving around town, stopping at every barber pole we saw. Some barbers smiled like the first guy, some were icy. The tone and the words were different, but at the same time identical in meaning. "Can't help you. I can't handle his hair. We don't know how to cut that. I'd try one of the places over in Oakland." "Shit," Grandma said over and over again. She pointed the car north, drove up to MacArthur Boulevard, and headed toward the city limits. "Go back to Oakland," that white woman had shouted from her car window. "Go back to where you belong." So something even as simple and innocuous as getting a haircut was a major ordeal. And hair in and of itself was an ordeal for me growing up because of the fact that, when you're the only one, when you're different, you are an object of curiosity. And, I remember my first day at school, all the white kids standing around me touching my hair because they had never seen African American before. And it gave me a real complex. In fact, it gave my sisters a complex too. I'll read you another part about that. "I learned to hate my hair. White kids always wanted to touch it. Nobody in town wanted to cut it. It was like no other hair I saw on a regular basis. I lived with all women, and my sisters had their own issues with their hair. When they were little, they used to put sweaters on their heads to pretend that their hair was loose and mobile, like that of the white girls they saw every day. Later, Tracy, that's my oldest sister, would have my mother take her into Oakland to a stylist who gave her some kind of permanent that relaxed the strands, allowing her to swing her head back and forth with every move of her head, allowing her to swing her hair back and forth with every move of her head. She called it getting her hair blonde. She thought that's what you called hair that could move. Later, Delisa, my other sister, would ask for her hair to be blonde too so that she could be like the white girls. Her permanent didn't take, though. Something happened that caused all of her hair to fall out. There was a bad reaction to the chemicals. Poor Delisa found that being bald was even worse than having black hair. The teasing she endured was relentless. Her self-esteem shattered in ways that I doubt are repaired to this day. I, too, wanted hair like the white boys. I wanted to flip my hair out of my eyes and run my fingers through it. I wanted to stick out my lower lip and blow upward, breezing it off my forehead when I was frustrated. I wanted their hair. I wanted hair that the other kids didn't want to touch. From childhood to adulthood, I tried everything for quote-unquote normal hair. I tried straightening it with a hot comb, the result being a stiff, slightly scorched mop that retreated back to its original texture within a day or so. I tried grease. Grandma took me into Oakland, the only place to buy anything resembling African-American products, where I bought Dixie Peach that I slathered on my follicles by the handful. It stayed down all right, but I still couldn't move it. I couldn't blow it out of my face, and I sure couldn't flip it. When I was a teenager, I saw Smokey Robinson singing on television. He had these beautiful, shiny curls. Beautiful, shiny, mobile curls. I went to an Oakland hair salon and got my first Jerry curl. It was curly, all right. It moved. I could flip it out of my face. I had to. The grease and oil that had to be put on it daily in order for it to retain its form was profuse and disgusting. I had to stock up on spray bottles of oily activator without a daily dose. I had a mop of straw in my head. To make matters worse, it stained everything my head touched. If I rested my head against a chair or leaned against the back seat of the car, there was a gross, oily smudge. Grandma hated it, and she blamed Smokey Robinson. When I worked with Smokey for the first time years later, Grandma said, "You tell his ass he owes me for pillowcases and sheets." And I told him that, and he hit the floor. He said, "You have any idea how many couches I ruined with that Jerry curl?" And so finally my wife says, "You get that crap out of your head or I'm leaving you." So, it was, what this story is about being different and about being the only one. And at some point in your life, you're going to be the only one. Whether you're the only black, the only white, the only Asian, the only Latino, the only woman, at some point, you're going to find yourself in a position where you're the only one. And how do you cope and how do you find your own identity when you are the only one? And the problem that you run into, and the problem that I had, is there's this line that I had to walk where, I didn't fit in with the white people. And then you get this "you're not a genuine black man" stuff from the black people because you don't act black, whatever that is. And, this is stuff about being an Oreo, whatever that is. And I found out that this goes on in every culture, that there are Asians who get grief from other Asians because they act too Eurocentric, and they call them Twinkies, yellow on the outside, white on the inside, or bananas. Latinos, they call them coconuts, brown on the outside and white on the inside. And I guess the point of this and the conclusion I came to is that nobody has the right to define you but you. That's the first thing. Nobody has the right to define you but you. And the second you allow somebody else to define you is when you're in trouble. And, Barack Obama's going through that same stuff right now. When he had the YouTube debate, the first question is, are you black enough? That was the first question he got. And he said, well, I can't get a cab. So what is the litmus test? Who is it that makes this decision? Now, what's interesting about San Leandro is, as I said, is that it was, white by design. It was an organized plot. It was organized, and there was collusion between real estate agents, between the homeowners associations, and between the city council to keep black people out of the city. I found a stack of documents from Fair Housing. And there were 50 people in San Leandro at the time who were brave enough to put their names out publicly and say that they were part of fair housing. They wanted an open and fair housing community. And they were just, harassed and ridiculed. If you watch the Suburban Wall video on my site, you'll see the president of fair housing at the time. She's a suburban mom. Her husband works at Lawrence Livermore Labs. She's got 3 little girls. One's riding a big wheel. The others are climbing over her shoulder while she's trying to give the interview. And I tracked her down. Her name's Glennie Nasty. She lives in Richmond now. And I tracked her down. And she said the day after that interview aired, someone threw a brick through their window. And for the next 2 weeks, people called on the phone and said, if you continue to go on this course to try to get black people in this city, we will kill your children. That's how bad it was. So I got a box of documents that was given to me because every story that I found led me to somebody who had another story or had more information, more documents about what it was they were doing at the time. So this is a San Leandro Fair Housing Committee report from January 24th, 1972. We moved there in August. It's right before we got there. And this report these are actual quotes. Attitudes of some realtors are reflected in these actual quotes. Our prices are high enough to keep them out. We can control it, the entry of minorities into the city, with our prices. Thank God our prices are too high for them. They can't raise a dime. I don't want to do business with niggers. I've told the neighbors that they don't have to worry. Nobody would tell you anything on the phone. They have to see what color you are. If you write white on the card, the realtors will call you. Now, they tried everything to get us out, every kind of harassment to get us out. And my mother's attitude was that you have the right in America to live anywhere you want to live as long as you can afford it and as long as you are willing to be a good neighbor and a member of the community. And she ended up suing, the single mother ended up suing this multimillionaire landowner over the harassment, over him trying to kick us out. I won't tell you how the lawsuit ends up because that's spoiling the book for you. That's like me telling you Rosebud's the sled, and I don't want to do that. And I just ruined that movie for most of you, didn't I, apparently? That's how bad it was. And what's interesting is, again, this is the Bay Area, which is supposedly so liberal and supposedly so tolerant, especially in those days. It was not the South. The only difference between racism in the South and racism in the West and in the North was that in the South, at least they were honest. At least in the South, there were signs and they'd say it to your face. Whereas in, the Bay Area and in the North, they were a lot more subversive. I'll give you another example. There was a restaurant in town. I don't name it. I mentioned the story in the book, but I don't name the place. It's still there. And what this place used to do is, because they didn't want blacks coming in, and they didn't want Latinos coming in either, is my understanding. So if you came in and you were a person of color, they would seat you and be very, very polite and give you whatever it is that you ordered. But before they served it, they'd pour a ton of salt on the food. They'd oversalt the food so that way you'd eat it and go, ah, and not come back again. I mean, that's how subversive this whole attitude was. Now, here's how the city of San Leandro has changed. In 1960, it was 99.99% white. 1970, 99.99% white. As of the 2000 census, it is the 4th most neighborhood diverse city in the state of California. That's how it's changed. Now, why has it changed? The kids I grew up with, their parents their parents had grown up in Oakland. And after World War II, when you had blacks who were working in the shipyards or who were stationed out here decided, I'm not going back to Mississippi. Why? You had white flight happen. And so they moved to San Leandro. Well, once San Leandro started to become more diverse, the kids I grew up with have now run off to Dublin, San Ramon, Orinda, Lafayette, Alamo, Danville, all the places that are now, if you look at the demographics, 95, 96% white. There's this white flight going on now, and I always say my goal is to drive them into the sea. And so with that, I think I've chatted on for quite a bit here. So if there are any questions from the audience, I would be happy to take them. I'm honored to see so many folks come out today, first of all, so thank you very much for that. Cliff, you up? Yeah, Mike's right there, I'm told, so just come on up and you can ask me just about anything.
I have 2 questions. First, how did you find your humor? And then, did you find humor in your situation while you were growing up in San Leandro?
Oh, okay. How did I find my humor, and did I find humor in a situation in San Leandro growing up? The way that I found my humor was I was getting in fights every single day, and I was not a fighter. I mean, I was a scrawny kid, and I didn't know how to fight, and I was getting beaten up every single day. And I learned that if they were laughing, that they would forget that they wanted to beat me up. And so that's where it came from. It was a defense mechanism that I used to stay out of fights. As long as they were laughing, even if they were mad and if fists were clenched, if I could find something to make them laugh, after a while, they would forget that they wanted to fight. At the time, I did not find humor in the situation at all. And I grew up thinking, is what happens to children who grow up as the only one, is they think that everybody else is normal and there's something wrong with them. And so I didn't find humor in that situation at the time at all. I grew up thinking there's something wrong with me because I'm not like everybody else. I mean, I don't have to worry about, oh, I better put on a hat or I'm going to get sunburned. I mean, I didn't have to worry about, that kind of thing. The hair situation and all that stuff. So I didn't find humor in it until later, until I was able to write about it and to analyze it some. Good question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the way you told your experience was very nice, but it was only, I was in San Leandro at that roughly before you.
I'm sorry, one more time?
I lived in San Leandro, went to San Leandro High School.
Oh, you went to San Leandro High School, okay.
For a short period during the 60s. The state had a way of sort of putting people in different neighborhoods when they came out of the California youth system. But anyway, the way you told it was very nice, but being part of there and being on the other side of the fence, it was, you got it about, you were very polite and very kind, because I saw the other side of it, and it was a whole lot worse. I mean, the attitudes were just a whole lot worse than
oh, the attitudes were terrible. The
Yeah.
attitudes were absolutely terrible. I mean, the first black resident, we were not the first black residents there. The first black resident was a doctor, and his kids probably went to school with you at San Leandro High in the 60s.
Yeah.
Was a doctor, and he lived in the San Leandro Hills, Bay Vista, which is the kind of rich area of town. And the first week they moved in, somebody took a shotgun and blasted it through his front door.
Yeah.
That was when they first moved in. So it was made very, very clear that you are not welcome here. And my mother was very, very stubborn. And my mother was what black folks call sedity. She liked to put on airs. She and Grandma were from Birmingham, Alabama, but my mother used to tell people she was born in Providence, Rhode Island, because it sounded better. Yeah. And Grandma would just go, shit. And I remember saying, Grandma, I said to my mom, it's in the book, because my mom, I go, where were you born? She goes, Providence, Rhode Island. And the grandma goes, God, I ain't ever been to no doggone Rhode Island. So how in the hell was you born there?
Yeah.
So, but it was bad. But again, it's changed. And what's interesting now, too, is that, great analogy. I have a friend who is Jewish and took a trip to Germany. And he said that every time he'd run across somebody who was elderly, an old German person, he'd always look at him and wonder, what part did you play? And when I run across some of these old San Leandro people, it's the same kind of thing. I wonder, what part did you play in this? Because everybody I fit them into 3 categories. There were those that were complicit in the discrimination. There were those who were completely oblivious. They were really people who were completely and totally oblivious to what was going on. And my personal favorites are those who were complicit yet now claim to have been oblivious. And what's funny is I've caught a couple of those people who've like come to the show or come to a book signing and, oh my goodness, I had no idea that was such a terrible thing. And then later on I'll find an old article or a news clip and there they are. Talking about, well, we have to keep this area safe, and the only way to keep it safe is by, so.
Yeah.
Is by being racist bigots. Other than that, we can't keep it safe. So, so.
Yeah. I had a question about one.
Yes, what was your question?
Yeah, there was a very powerful comedian named Dick Gregory, probably right around that time. Does he have much of an influence on your comedy, and are you aware of where he's at and what he's doing these days?
I did not discover Dick Gregory until much later, until I was an adult. He didn't do comedy for very long. Dick Gregory was really the first black comic who was able to cross over and do comedy that white audiences would come to as well as black audiences would come to. And he's an activist is what he does. He's a social activist, anti-war protester, you name it, that's the kind of thing that he does. Yes, sir.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good.
I guess as someone that's also always had to kind of operate in primarily white spaces, I was just curious about how you've negotiated this kind of, I guess, constant conflict between when you come into frustrating like situations with people that aren't of color. How do you deal with it in terms of like, I guess just really ways of not falling into the angry black man archetype, but also kind of being true to yourself and not hitting the polar opposite and being like an Uncle Tom of sorts? Like, I was wondering just what have been your strategies over your entire lifetime when you come into conflict with people, whether it's in the workspace or in an educational area, and you just don't really like know how to deal with conflict in those situations and without becoming a stereotype? Well,
again, let's see. It took me a long time, as I said. I mean, and again, it's all in the book about how I really had a nervous breakdown. I literally had a nervous breakdown and tried to gas myself with a garage full of carbon monoxide. So obviously, I didn't have the strategies back then. Wow. Because when you hold, I like to describe it like shaking up a Coke. What happened to me was like when you shake up a can of Coke, everything looks fine on the outside, but when you finally open it, stuff comes out everywhere. And that's kind of what happened to me. I lost my mom when I was 15, and it was when I hit the age that she was when she passed is when all that stuff started to bubble to the surface for me. But in terms of negotiating that balance, I don't. I know who I am, and I'm confident in who I am, and being black is not, you're not, defined by what kind of music you listen to. You're not defined by what kind of programs you watch or how it is you dress or how it is or where it is that you choose to reside. I mean, black people are not a monolith. Black people have as many different attitudes as white people do. You'll find rich, you'll find poor, you'll find liberal, you'll find conservative, same as in any other ethnic group. And I know who it is that I am. And if you don't like who I am, tough. And that's how I negotiate. And that's how I can do this and not be an angry black man about things. I'm not angry. I know who I am. If you have a problem with it, then that's your problem. Whether you're black, white, green, or purple, you got a problem with who I am, that's your problem. That's not mine. And that's what it is that you've got to do. And that's where this idea, as I say, about defining yourself and not letting other people define you comes from.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a good question. How you doing?
Good. I have a couple of questions. So,
a couple?
So if you were feeling that way, how were your sisters feeling, right? And then the other question is, seeing that you were saying you were getting beat up all the time, how did your mother react? Didn't she want to leave because, felt bad for her son?
Well, and the first question was, how did my sisters react? And what's funny is that we never discussed it. We never, ever talked about it. We'd all go out in the world and all these things would happen to us, and then we got home and we never discussed it. The first time we talked about it was when my play opened. When the play opened in 2004 at the Marsh in San Francisco. Afterwards, we sat down and we started to tell stories. And we, for the first time, started to discuss it, and my sister started to cry and tell stories about things that had happened, that we just went out in the world and, these things would happen, and we'd suck it up and then just come home and leave it outside. But what's interesting is we found out that there were so many things that we all dealt with that were identical things and that we dealt with the same way. I'll give you a perfect example. You know how when you're in school and like you maybe in literature class or social studies where you're reading aloud in class in elementary school, and maybe you'll read a paragraph, and then the person behind you reads a paragraph, and the person behind him reads the next paragraph out loud. Okay, anytime we were reading anything where the word black, Negro, colored, African came up, every head in the class would turn and look at me. So I got to what I would do is, if we were reading aloud, I would skim ahead in the book to see if there was anything like that was coming up. And if I saw that it was coming up, I'd ask to be excused to go to the bathroom, and I'd go and I'd stay in the restroom until I figured they'd gotten past that part. And I'm talking to my sisters, and I find out from my sisters that they did even though we never discussed it, they did the exact same thing. Because every head in the class would turn and would look. As for the fights and getting beaten up every day and my mother feeling badly for me, first it was public school, and I was blamed, because since I was the constant in the fights, it must be my fault. And so I was in the principal's office. So then we moved to Catholic school, which in the beginning was worse. I mean, there's nothing worse than a bitter, pissed off old nun. And that is what it is that I dealt with there. I mean, at one point, two boys dragged me in the bathroom and beat me up, and the principal came in, a nun, and I told her, again, like the cop, I think I'm saved, and she slaps my face and sends me back to the classroom. But my mother, again, she felt that if you run every time that you're challenged, if her feeling was that if we left, then they win. And also, and my feeling was, if I ever let them see me cry, then they won. So I would never let them see me cry. If I was going to cry, I would, that was only reserved for my bedroom with the door closed. They never ever saw me cry. And again, had I let more of that stuff out, I wouldn't have ended up in that garage, shaking up the Coke can like it is that I said. So, but her whole thing was to stand her ground. You can't let bullies chase you away from what you want to do or where it is that you want to be. And so, a lot of that stuck with me, and now with my kids. How you doing?
Yeah, hey. So my question is, after you moved out of your hometown, was there an immediate effort to reach out and connect with the larger Black community that you had been separated from for your childhood, or how did you deal with doing that?
Well, here's the catch. The catch is I never moved. I live in San Leandro right now. As I said, I lost my mother when I was 15, and Grandma raised us. From that point on, my youngest sister was 11 months old when my mom died. And my grandmother raised us, and we stayed in town. We couldn't afford to move anyplace else. And then later on, I thought about how hard they'd fought for us to be here. And again, the demographics of the city were changing. There are a lot more Black folks there now. And the demographics of the city were changing. And I felt that my mom wasn't there to stand her ground, so I would stand her ground. And it's a wonderful place to live, which is why I'm still there. If it were still that bad, I wouldn't be there. I'd have taken off. But as I said, it's the fourth most neighborhood diverse city in the state now. As a result of that, it's a whole different place. I live in the San Leandro Hills now. I live in a different part of town, and it's a different situation. And most, the line that best describes how the demographics of the city have changed is that the racial attitudes of San Leandro have changed coffin by coffin. That's how they changed. Is that old racist guard? Most of them have died off, and that's it. But in terms of reaching out to the larger Black community, what's interesting is the one thing that I learned is I didn't see people in that way. In terms of I need to go to the Black community and do this because I've been with the white community. I will perform for any audience. I will speak to any audience. I will, do a benefit for any kind of an audience. I was raised Catholic, and there are not very many African American Catholics, although I would go with Grandma to the Baptist church on occasion. which is a mostly black church. But, other than that, my interactions are with, look around the room here, are with people of all races. I didn't feel that I, needed to run to East Oakland now to prove how black I am. And I know other people who grow up in similar situations who then would completely go the other way to just try to be as hardcore as they, as they possibly could, and get dashikis and stuff and change their name to some unpronounceable African name or something to show that they were, to prove how black they were. But I just didn't feel the need to do that. Yes.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Williams. Thanks for coming to speak with us today.
Oh, I'm sorry, one more time. I can't hear you.
I said my name is Stephanie Williams. First of all, I want to say thank you for coming to speak to us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Nice to
my
meet you,
question
Stephanie.
for you, you mentioned your kids. I'm wondering how old are they today? And with all of the things that you're talking about, in your show, and just their own experiences now, like, as far as you know, what is their perception of the world around them and what's going on in their lives?
Well, they didn't know about any of this again until the show came out. And I sat them down and I talked to them about the garage stuff too, because I knew it was going to be in the reviews in the paper, and I didn't want them to read it someplace. But their experience has been completely different from mine. They're in Catholic school. It's a more integrated community that they're in. I'll tell you a great story. My sister Tracy, incidentally, she's my next, we're all 2 years apart except for Heather the baby. My sister Tracy is the reigning Mrs. California. She is the first Mrs. California, African-American Mrs. California in the history of the Mrs. America pageant. That is what became of her. And so she goes around, they put a crown on her head, so there's no living with her now. And she goes around speaking about domestic violence and about diversity and the like. So my daughter Carolyn, who's now 16, when Carolyn was in the 8th grade, there was a boy who she'd gone to school with, she'd been at the same school from kindergarten on through 8th, who called her at recess, called her a nigger. And she wasn't that bent out of shape. I was a kid who she knew, and she'd grown up with this kid, and he was just a kid who said something stupid, who didn't realize the power of the word and what it was that it meant, and that it was how nasty it was, and he soon learned from, his parents and the school and everything else. But my daughter really, she just said, "Why would you call me that?" And I was just, when I found out. So I called Tracy, and I go, "Carolyn just got called a nigger at school." She goes, "How old is Carolyn?" I said, she's 13. She goes, "Oh, and this is the first time she's been called a nigger." I said, "Yeah." She says, "In San Leandro." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Wow, things really have gotten better." Because that was like the first day, because my sisters all moved up in 2001. They all moved up north to Elk Grove, up to Sacramento, Elk Grove area. So their perception and their reality is completely different from mine. I went to Moreau Catholic High School in Hayward, and Moreau, I was the only African-American in a class of 350. I'll tell you a great story. Only black in a class of 350. I walk into my high school class reunion, and they give me a name tag. I said, "Are you kidding me?" Whereas now it's changed. Now Moreau is a minority-majority school, and my son was the first African-American student body president in the history of the school. Things have changed in the area, in the East Bay. Things have changed. Anyone else?
I did have one question as well.
Okay, now you're the one that gave the announcement about how you have to use the mic so that the YouTube people can hear it. Oh, the rules don't apply to Cliff here at Google. The rules are just for the rest of you.
Again, thank you very much for coming today. With the fact that your play was or still is, I should say, the longest running play in San Francisco, how did you keep make each play unique, make each piece fresh as you were going through over several years?
Well, the way that the play works is it's a solo show. I play like 30 different characters in the play, and it jumps back and forth between me being a kid and me going through this breakdown. Back and forth between me being an 8-year-old kid and being a man in his 30s. And every audience is different, and people connect to different parts of the story. Some people connect to the outsider aspect. Some people connect to the depression aspect. Some people connect to the persecution aspect. Some people, connect to the part about being different. The show ran off Broadway for 3 months, for a summer of '06. And I found the fascinating thing when I was off Broadway was that the largest audience I had was Holocaust survivors. And, as I come out after the show and I shake hands with people and I try to say hello to folks after the show. And I kept meeting all these Holocaust survivors. And to my knowledge, up to that point, I'd never met a survivor before. And finally, after a couple weeks, I asked Brian, I go, so why am I getting so many survivors who come to see the show? And he said, it's because they get it. Because survivors walk around in a world full of people. They can be walking down Madison Avenue at noontime when there are 10,000 people on the street, yet they feel isolated and like they're all alone because you can't get it because you weren't there. And that part of the story they relate to. And because of the fact that so many people relate to so many different parts of the story, every audience is different. And some audiences, they'll laugh at the jokes. Other audiences, I will hear not a peep out of them for the entire 2 hours. It's a 2-hour show, and then people will be on their feet crying. A lot of people cry during the show because it brings up a lot of stuff. Some are, there's a lot I write about domestic violence. My mom and I and my sisters were, victims of domestic violence. That's in there. Some people relate to that. I mean, there was a part where I had to pull a butcher knife on my father when I was 10 to get him off my mother. And I can always tell guys in the audience who have done that, and again, you think you're the only one, and you're not. And, I can always tell guys who've been in that situation because they'll tense up. They'll tense up. I can see them, grab a hold of the chair or that kind of a thing. It's so it's fresh in that no two audiences are exactly the same and no two audiences take exactly the same thing from it. Same thing with the book. People will take different things from the book. People will relate to and connect to different things. And that's why I'm able to continue doing it. It was supposed to run for 6 weeks and then I'd be gone. I'd be done with it and I'd go to the next thing on my someday list, which was coincidentally to write a book. That was the next thing on my someday list. So.
So we have time for one more.
We have time for one more? Okay.
Okay, I just had a quick question.
Yes.
I kind of grew up in a similar neighborhood where I was the only black person. And one thing that I kind of got walking out of it was that I felt that I was always hypersensitive to race issues. And I've always kind of had to juggle this line of, am I pulling the race card or is this just somebody's actually legitimately telling me to do something, or are they talking down to me because I'm a black woman? So do you feel like you've kind of gained that hypersensitivity, or that, or how do you kind of judge when you're saying something's an issue based on race or when something's just a regular issue?
It's funny, sometimes it's hard. And first of all, I don't believe in the race card. I mean, this pulling the race card stuff is, as far as I'm concerned, it's a way to dismiss legitimate issues. Yes, there are, I will use the phrase race pimps, like, Al Sharpton and folks like that, who it's just, they're out for their own gain as opposed to really trying to do something about problems that exist with race relations in this country. But I don't consider it, playing the race card when it could be a legitimate issue. And sometimes it's really hard to see. It's really hard to recognize and to know when you're in a situation when something's happened just because it's happened, or did it happen because there was something behind it. I'll give you a perfect example. My son needed glasses a couple of years ago, so we go to this optometrist. That was on. There's a list of optometrists on my insurance through AFTRA, the TV union, that I could go to in the area. So we go to this guy, and we walk in the door, and he's just rude. Have a seat. Any deductible's got to be paid up front immediately. He's just really, 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 terse and short with us. And I'm kind of thinking, wow, what's up with that? And I don't want to go to, is this guy racist? The reason he's doing this, or maybe he's just having a bad mood, And so I left my son. I had to take my daughter to another appointment, and I drop her off when I come back. And I pick up my son, and he gets in the car, and he says, "Dad, was that guy racist?" And I go, I really don't know. He could have just been having a bad day. And he goes, after you left, a white woman came in, and his attitude completely changed. He was, "Hi, how are you? Thank you. It's a pleasure to see you. Thank you for patronizing my establishment." That kind of a thing. And so, immediately I went there, and I found out, yeah, I guess he was. And I talked about the experience on the radio. And I didn't mention him by name. I just said it was a guy, and I told what the area was that I had this experience that happened. And I got all these calls from black people who knew exactly who I was talking about and who named him. So, to be quite honest with you, you really never know. You really never know. And sometimes you wonder, okay, did I get bad service because of the fact that this is just bad service, or did I get bad service because they don't want me to be here? There was a place in San Leandro, God, about 10 or 15 years ago. I remember we went out dancing one night and went and stopped at this place for like breakfast at like midnight or something. And I sat there for, it was a group of us, and no waitress came to our table. It was like an hour we sat there, but we'd been drinking and hanging out, and we're talking and chatting, and then we realized how late it is, and I said, forget it, I gotta go home. So a couple days later, I see, I bump into one of the waitresses who works there at a store, and she walks up to me and she says, I have to apologize to you about what happened to you. And I go, what? And she goes, well, we were told by the owner that we were not to serve your table, because he did not want black people coming into the restaurant on a regular basis. So again, you never know, and so when people say, well, you're applying the race card, I mean, I use that as a way of dismissing, what could be a legitimate issue, because there are people that believe that racism in America is over. And, it's not over. We all harbor and all of us harbor some kind of prejudice about something, whether in some kind of stereotype that we have ingrained in us that we believe, whether we realize that we believe it or not, and we all have to be conscious of that. I don't care what color you are, you harbor some attitude about some other race that you have to be careful and you have to be conscious of, I'll tell you another story. I was with one of my kids, and we're driving one day, and got cut off by this really bad driver, and he happened to be Asian. And, and my kid said something about Chinese drivers. Yeah, I heard they're all terrible drivers. I said, whoa, 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 whoa. See, that's a stereotype that you have to watch out for. Yes, there are some bad Asian drivers, and there are some bad white drivers, and there are some bad black drivers, but you can't just go there that because this driver happened to be Asian and you've heard that stereotype, that this is factual. So we all have to be vigilant.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you all very, very much. It's really, truly an honor to be here. I hope that you read the book and that you enjoy the book. Again, the play will be in San Jose throughout the month of August at the Hoover Theater, and I hope you'll come and check it out. My website is briancopeland.com. I invite you to go there and watch the Suburban Wall. Watch that. You'll think you're looking at something out of the Deep South. You'll think you're looking at, you won't believe that this is the Bay Area, the stuff that these people are saying. But that's how bad it was, and that's just how far we've come. You've all got copies of the book, I'm told, and I will be happy to sign a copy for anyone who would like me to do so. So again, thank you very, very much for having me. It's been a pleasure to be here.